Okay, and we're back with some more cold reading. Okay, this one is expecting others to understand how you feel. Quote, no human being can really understand another, and no one can arrange another's happiness. Graham Greene. A 42-year-old historian, Janet Lake, had taken a sabbatical from her university to write a textbook. To balance her isolation, she set up frequent get togethers and accepted every invitation that came along. She complained that she had to. Oh, all right, it's fine. She complained that she had to practically beg her husband, Robert, to join in. Robert viewed the pressure as an invasion of privacy and belittled Janet's excessive need to socialize. Janet also griped that when her husband did join in, he was rude and unfriendly. In return, Robert criticized her for being hypercritical. By the time the Lakes came to see me, the issue threatened to destroy their 7-year marriage. Clearly, each spouse had valid feelings and felt entitled to be understood. Just as clearly, neither one could comprehend the other. The gap was so huge they might have hailed from separate planets. To make things even more tense, each was convinced that the other could understand, but just didn't want to. You don't understand is one of the most frequent accusations hurled between people. It's exasperating to be misunderstood, so we explain ourselves again and again and again. Then the frustration escalates to anger, because even more upsetting than not being understood is feeling that the other person isn't even trying to understand. Our feelings are perfectly obvious to us, so they must be obvious to them too. They're just being stubborn. They don't care. So we try to force them to understand, which makes them feel cornered, and now there are two angry people. If they weren't in the mood to understand before, they're certainly not now. Quote, the human understanding is like a false mirror, which, receiving rays irregularly, distorts and discolors the nature of things by mingling its own nature with it. Francis Bacon. What a last name. It's important to realize that because we filter reality through individual values and perceptions, misunderstandings are inevitable. At times, it is impossible to comprehend another person's thoughts or emotions. However, it is possible to feel what someone else is feeling. Deep down, each of us has the same fundamental need for love, affection, esteem, security, self-expression, and other basics. When those needs are thwarted, we feel anger, fear, sadness, pain, and other universal emotions. By focusing on such commonly experienced feelings, you can achieve something deeper and more meaningful than understanding: empathy. Empathy is a priceless commodity because it invariably diffuses hostility. It is psychologically impossible to be angry at someone if, at the same time, you feel what he or she is feeling. One effective way to stimulate empathy is to use analogies to translate one person's feelings into the language of another. To begin the process with the Lakes, I presented Robert with a hypothetical situation related to his position as the head of a design group in an engineering firm. How would you feel if you were involved in a major project and someone on your team was sullen and flippant around your clients? Robert admitted that he would feel resentful and perhaps humiliated because his colleague's behavior might tarnish his own reputation. With some prodding, he was able to see the parallels to his wife's experience. Janet took pride in her reputation for bringing people together and stimulating conversation. In her eyes, Robert's curt behavior reflected badly on her and threatened a valued aspect of her life. Because friendships were as important to her as business relationships were to Robert, his antisocial behavior made her feel exactly the way he said he would feel in the imagined scenario. When Robert got the point, his posture visibly softened. "I'm sorry," he said. The Lakes were halfway to mutual empathy. Now Janet had to feel what her husband was feeling. It had become clear to me that Robert resisted socializing because he was more comfortable with objects and numbers than with people, especially strangers. By trivializing social events and acting as if Janet had no right to expect him to participate, he was able to conceal his sense of inadequacy and justify not making an effort. To help Janet empathize, I evoked a subject about which she was equally sensitive: her skills as a parent. Suppose every time you took your kids to daycare, they behaved obnoxiously in front of others. Suppose no matter what you did, they would still misbehave. Janet said she would be mortified. She would feel so inadequate that she might avoid being seen with her children to spare herself the embarrassment, just as Robert needed to avoid company because he felt inadequate socially. Then, to help her empathize with her husband's bitterness about being criticized, I asked her how would she feel if her own mother were to scrutinize her parenting and comment on her shortcomings. I'd get nervous and flustered and I'd resent it like hell, she admitted, which was exactly what happened to Robert at gatherings. Parenting. Okay, Shad. It would be an exaggeration to suggest that analogies heal the lakes relationship. It did, however, change the atmosphere from one of antipathy to one of empathy. My bad. They now stood on common ground and could discuss their differences like adults. The end of understanding is not to prove and find reasons, but to know and believe. Thomas Carlyle. While this process can be used whenever misunderstandings arise, it is especially helpful in male-female relationships. In that context, I have found certain types of analogies to be especially fruitful. For men, career situations and the need for autonomy. For women, relationship issues and the need for intimacy. As a general rule, regardless of their professions, status, or expressed values, men and women tend to look to those areas for identity and respect. For a man, losing his job might elicit feelings of unworthiness similar to those of a woman whose love affair has ended. The frustration of a man trapped in a dead-end job is comparable to that of a woman hemmed in by children and household duties. A man's fear of humiliation is similar to a woman's fear of abandonment. Feeling is more powerful than meaning. If you are willing to make the effort to feel what others are feeling and to help them feel what you feel, you can use analogies to create empathy. Usable insight. When they just don't understand, get them to feel what you're feeling. Taking action. If not being understood has made you frustrated instead of becoming hostile, pause and try to express yourself in a different way. Instead of lecturing, criticizing, or intellectualizing, try using analogies that will help the other person feel what you feel. First, identify your emotions. Figure out exactly why you are feeling what you're feeling and what you're feeling. Think of a situation that would make the other person feel what you feel. Analogies work best when they fit the individual's personality and circumstances. Ask how he or she would feel in that situation. Don't be accusatory. Speak in an even, conciliatory tone. Once the other party acknowledges the appropriate feelings, ask if he or she can see a parallel to your experience. You might have to prod, as in, when you criticize me in front of our friends, I feel just the way you do when... Switch roles by imagining a situation in which you would feel what the other person has been feeling. Let the other person know that you understand how he or she feels. You are likely to see the hostility dissolve before your eyes, freeing both of you to communicate more openly. And that is it. Yeah, I definitely agree. I agree. Those are some great points. Definitely. Because empathy is such a powerful thing. And not to be a weapon or anything, but in order to help you to connect, to take that step back and then approach something that you was approaching with your own way and your own values. Like, me, and it just causes you to just clash. But you take a step back and you try to understand what it is that the person is feeling. You could even ask them for clarity, Sometimes people need that step back too, to say, okay, I don't even know what I'm feeling right now. Let me take a minute, understand what's going on with me right now, and then come back to it. So sometimes you'll find people need a moment before they can address something, and then I feel like that's normal, you know what I mean? Or allowable, I should say, because everyone's normal is different. But sometimes you can't just immediately identify what emotion you're feeling. Sometimes it's a bunch of them at once, and you're like, okay, you're just overwhelmed. So, yeah, I think empathy and those that analogy that's a really good tool to have because you could figure out what you feel in and you know the person enough to draw an analogy would get them to feel the same how you feel in that situation. So now it's like, okay, I feel like this. You know what I mean? Using the situation you just explained. But yeah, I think it's really, really important. Empathy is definitely the way to go because when you try to just view the world only through your lens, it's frustrating because it's only one you, and it's kind of it's kind of boring that way. You know what I mean? People have ways of looking at things that you would never imagine. You'd be like, oh wow, that's something new. But anyway, that's it for today. Cold reading is done, and I hope you got something out of that. Have a lovely week.